Oh my goodness, that's a great question because you would probably get just a handful of people that would be.
At 68, Vince Gill still carries himself like the humble, guitar-slinging poet fans fell in love with decades ago, but behind the velvet voice and shelves of Grammy Awards is a side of Gill the public rarely sees: the quiet critic, the fierce competitor, the man who's kept his true feelings buried beneath decades of country charm. Throughout his career, Gill quietly resented artists who chased fame over craft, who bent the rules of tradition, or who disrespected the genre he spent his life defending. And now, in a recent interview, Vince Gill reveals the names of these 7 artists. You may think you know Vince Gill, but after this, you'll never hear his music, or theirs, the same way again. Let's start at the beginning. Before the fame, before the feuds. Because by the time we reach the last person on his list, you'll be questioning everything you thought you knew about country royalty. The making of Vince Gill. He grew up in Norman, Oklahoma. Not exactly Nashville, but close enough to dream. Vince Gill was born into a household filled with music and hard lessons. His father was a federal judge and a part-time musician, strict but loving. It was from him that Gill learned both discipline and how to play guitar, lessons that would shape not just his music, but his entire identity. Vince's path to success was paved with heartbreak. He joined bluegrass bands in his early years, grinding through small gigs, sleeping in vans, and accepting whatever pay he could scrape together. He learned to survive on talent, grit, and the support of fellow musicians who recognized his rare gift. But everything changed when he joined the country rock band Pure Prairie League. His voice turned heads, and this time it didn't hang up. In the 80s and 90s, he became a fixture of the country scene. 21 Grammy wins, countless CMAs, and respect from every corner of the industry. He became known as a songwriter's songwriter, a musician who never took shortcuts and never chased trends. His guitar spoke with elegance, his lyrics with honesty. But with that success came something else: disappointment. Because behind the scenes, Vince watched as the genre he loved began to shift. Faster, flashier, more commercial. Country music was changing, and not always in ways he respected. He saw artists rise on image instead of skill. He watched genuine songwriting give way to mass-market formulas. Awards began going to acts he felt hadn't paid their dues, who built careers on gimmicks, catchphrases, and shock value rather than substance. He sat in award shows, applauding politely, even as his blood boiled. He saw performers lip-syncing while real musicians were pushed to the shadows. He watched industry executives reward artists who played politics instead of playing instruments. And worst of all, he watched the heart of country music. Truth, struggle, humility get replaced by filters, flash, and manufactured rebellion. He bit his tongue for years, but now the gloves are off. Vince never named names until now. Chris Christopherson.
We make it through the night's pretty great. Whammy Lord's great. Would you call this guy a great singer? Not necessarily.
This one shocked even longtime fans, because for decades, Vince Gill publicly praised the legends, the greats who paved the way. But behind the scenes, there was one name that, according to insiders, Vince avoided completely: Chris Christopherson. They came from different worlds. Chris was the outlaw poet. Raw, ragged, unpredictable. He'd crash parties, slur his way through interviews, and still walk out with the room's respect. Vince, on the other hand, was precise, polished, a technician in the studio, and a perfectionist on stage. He valued technical skill, lyrical structure, and vocal control. And while Vince never openly attacked Christopherson, there was something in the way he dodged his name in interviews. Something in the long pauses. Something unsaid, but felt. One story from a CMA rehearsal made the rounds for years. When Christopherson was scheduled to perform, Vince reportedly left early, mumbling something about not watching another train wreck on stage. It was never confirmed, but in Nashville, stories like that don't need confirmation to stick. Privately, Vince was said to be deeply frustrated by the way critics romanticized Christopherson's messiness, calling it authentic, gritty, and real. while other, more skilled performers who practiced relentlessly got passed over. One close friend claimed Vince once said, "It's not deep, it's just sloppy. We lowered the bar and called it genius." He didn't hate Kristofferson's success. He resented how it rewrote the rules of what greatness looked like. To Vince, artistry was about mastering your craft. Chris, in his eyes, had skipped the discipline and been rewarded for the damage. Years went by, and the tension never fully faded. There were no duets, no tributes, no collaborations. Even when Vince hosted events honoring other greats from Kristofferson's era, his name was conspicuously absent, like a ghost left off the guest list. And now, in a rare moment of honesty, Gill finally included him on the list. Not out of malice, but because the divide was too deep to deny. But if Vince saw Kristofferson as a symbol of chaos, the next artist represented something even worse in his eyes: the moment country music sold its soul. Garth Brooks. It's almost sacrilege to suggest tension between Vince Gill and Garth Brooks, two titans of the industry, two names etched into the DNA of country music. But if you know the history, if you've followed the subtle signals, the divide becomes impossible to ignore. Vince was the craftsman, the quiet poet, the guy who'd spend hours perfecting a solo, rewriting a verse until it felt like truth. Garth? He brought pyrotechnics, headset mics, and a stadium-sized ego to the genre. He turned country concerts into rock spectacles, and to some, including Vince, it felt like something sacred was being trampled on. It wasn't just the performances, it was the philosophy. Gill valued nuance, restraint, melody. Garth valued movement, flash, scale. Where Vince delivered heartbreak with a whisper, Garth roared about it across sold-out arenas. Gill saw himself as a steward of country's roots. Garth, to him, was the architect of its commercial revolution, for better or worse. In interviews, Gill once lamented that we lost the stories in country music. He never pointed fingers directly, but fans connected the dots. He didn't have to say Garth's name. Everyone knew who rewrote the rules and rerouted the river. And when Garth began selling out arenas and dominating award shows, many felt the soul of country was fading. And Vince, with his mournful ballads and guitar solos, was being quietly pushed aside. Insiders say Vince was gracious in public but quietly mourned what the genre had become. He reportedly turned down opportunities to present Garth with Lifetime Achievement Awards, not out of bitterness, but because he couldn't fake admiration he didn't feel. It wasn't just a stylistic clash, it was a philosophical one. To Vince, country music wasn't about fireworks or crowd surfing. It was about storytelling, roots, humility. And Garth, for all his success, represented an era where those values got lost in the roar of the crowd. Was it jealousy, or just heartbreak watching a genre transform beyond recognition? Maybe both. Either way, Gill never celebrated Garth's wins. He didn't clap at the standing ovations. He never showed up to those front row seats. Next up, a mullet-wearing heartthrob who made country explode for all the wrong reasons. Billy Ray Cyrus. Achy, breaky heart made Billy Ray Cyrus a household name overnight. It was catchy, it was viral before viral was a thing, and it sent country music straight into pop culture history. But not everyone was clapping. Vince Gill, whose musical background was rooted in jazz-level complexity, deep songwriting, and traditional country values, reportedly found the track insulting to real musicianship. In a CMA green room, Gill was overheard joking that Billy Ray's song set country music back 10 years. And it wasn't just a one-off remark. That quote circulated like wildfire among industry insiders, fueling speculation that Gill saw Billy Ray as a threat to the genre's integrity. To Vince, country music was supposed to be about stories, pain, hope, truth. But here came Billy Ray with a one-liner hook, a dance craze, and a marketing engine so big it drowned out everything else. Gill once reportedly said the song wasn't country, it was karaoke with a mullet. The two never collaborated, never shared a stage. And if they passed each other in the hallway, it was said to be icy at best. While some artists tried to balance innovation with respect for the roots, Billy Ray seemed to sprint in the opposite direction. He leaned into the flash, the hair, the hips, the gimmick. To Vince, it all felt like a parody of what country was supposed to be: heartfelt, grounded, and born of lived experience. Gill didn't hate Billy Ray personally, he never needed to, but he couldn't stand what Billy Ray represented: a rise in gimmicky, image-driven, style-over-substance music that began pulling Nashville in a direction Gill had spent his life resisting. And the next artist? She sold more albums than nearly anyone in the genre's history, and Gill couldn't bear the sound of her records. Shania Twain. To the world, Shania Twain was the queen of country pop. Her rise was meteoric, groundbreaking, glamorous, and unstoppable. But to many purists, including Vince Gill, she was something else entirely: a disruptor. Her glossy production, pop-drenched hooks, and massive crossover appeal left little room for the kind of raw, roots-driven music Gill championed. In her wake, a wave of artists followed, chasing the same sleek formula, leaving tradition behind in favor of market-tested melodies and million-dollar music videos. Though he never named her directly, Gill once said, "We lost a generation of real country fans chasing radio hits." He later added, "Sometimes we forget what genre we're in." For longtime fans, it wasn't hard to read between the lines. And while most legends in the industry eventually crossed paths, shared tributes, duets, or at least a shared stage, Gill and Twain never did. Not during her rise, not at award shows, and not even during genre-spanning tributes where their names easily belonged side by side. For two massive artists in the same lane, that silence wasn't just awkward, it was deafening. Behind closed doors, some insiders said Vince saw Shania's rise as a tipping point, when Nashville started chasing trends instead of talent, and when country music started sounding like anything but. And the next name? He redefined bro country, and left Vince shaking his head: Jason Aldean. Jason Aldean burst onto the scene with baseball caps, heavy guitars, and lyrics that leaned more into trucks, whiskey, and tailgates than heartbreak and truth. His sound was loud, his brand was bold, and his fan base exploded almost overnight. But while mainstream audiences embraced him, not everyone in Nashville was impressed. Vince Gill, meanwhile, has always championed songwriting as an art form, storytelling as soul. And he didn't hide his disapproval of the bro-country wave. "I think we've dumbed it down," he once told Rolling Stone. "There's room for fun in music, but let's not pretend it's country just because there's a pickup truck in the video." That wasn't a passing opinion, it was a shot across the bow. To Gill, Aldean's rise marked another departure from the values he fought to preserve. Loud production, shallow lyrics, and what Gill called lifestyle marketing over lived experience were never what he believed country music stood for. Though Aldean and Gill have both appeared at major country festivals, they've never shared a bill. And insiders say Gill has quietly declined to present or attend any event where Aldean was the featured headliner. It wasn't about ego, it was about identity. Gill couldn't bring himself to endorse what Aldean represented. The distance wasn't just stylistic, it was philosophical. One built his legacy on substance, the other on spectacle. But if Aldean was too loud for Gill, the next guy might have been too loud for the whole world. Kanye West. This one might sound far-fetched, but hear us out. Vince Gill never named Kanye West, but in multiple interviews, he's made one thing abundantly clear. He believes the ego in modern music is suffocating. He's called out artists who chase fame over craft, spectacle over substance, and if that sounds familiar, it's because it is. In 2016, Gill said in an interview, "I see young artists walk into a room and expect the world to bow. Back in my day, you earned respect by listening first." When pressed if he meant anyone in particular, Gill just smiled and said nothing. But the timing of that quote was no coincidence. It came the very same month Kanye declared himself the greatest artist of all time during a now infamous rant. The media ran wild with speculation. Fans read between the lines. The industry, they said, knew exactly who Vince meant. To Gill, music is sacred. It's about humility, service, and sincerity. It's not about hijacking award shows or demanding attention at every turn. And Kanye, whether intentionally or not, became the embodiment of everything Vince seemed to stand against. Chaos over control, self-worship over soul. They've never crossed paths, never needed to, because to Vince, this wasn't about genre, it was about values. So now you know the 7 names Vince Gill couldn't stand, publicly or privately. From legends to pop stars to genre-bending risk-takers, these weren't casual disagreements. These were deep fractures in the soul of country music, moments where Vince chose silence over support, dignity over popularity,